Hello, welcome back to Doomer Optimism. I'm your host, Nate, and I'm here with Robert Hirschfeld. Robert is the Director of Water Policy at Prairie Rivers here in Illinois, and you're in Champaign, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Great. And so today we're going to talk about many things, largely about water quality and agriculture, but we'll see where else it goes. I guess to kick things off, um, I want maybe just give you a chance to tell me, what is the water quality like in, say, Central Illinois, Iowa, places like that at the moment?
Honestly, it's terrible. I mean, um, some people don't even realize how bad it is, and so I often just start when I'm talking to people, or part of our job is really to advocate for law and policy change, or maybe culture change. So that's the level that we work at, and that requires educating people. And sometimes I'll just start with Illinois EPA's own assessment of our streams and rivers, right? So, under the Clean Water Act, Illinois EPA has to assess water quality for various uses. And, the most recent assessment was that of the streams that EPA has assessed, 60% are too polluted to support native aquatic life. 80% are too polluted to support human contact, so swimming, and 100%, yes, 100% are too polluted to fully support fish consumption. So, I mean, those numbers I think tell a story themselves. They're very stark. Um, the water quality is not good.
What does
We've
that
got
mean
so
exactly? Can we break that down more? Like, what does it mean? Like bad water quality? Like what's in there? What makes it bad?
yeah, so like those numbers from EPA. I mean, there's a lot that's in there. It could be some of that could be industrial pollution, like from coal plants, so heavy metals, mercury. We actually do have a lot of coal production in the state. Historically, Illinois was a coal state. I think we're still the fourth biggest coal producer in the country.
Here I am,
A lot
where
of
I'm
that is
in.
happening in southern.
Yeah, where I'm in Fulton County, it's like there's old, strip mines everywhere. It's not mined much now, but there's just strip mine lakes everywhere from that. It was huge coal production here.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Illinois is kind of a weird state because you've got the economic and political powerhouse of Chicago, and it's like the joke is that everything south of I-80 is Southern Illinois, and so there's this kind of weird divide, and I think a lot of people in Chicago just have no concept of what's happening, and so a lot of the coal country is kind of as far south. But anyway, back to your question, so what's in those numbers? Well, there's a lot of different pollutants, and so you know that is a long story in and of itself. But I think it's fair to say that Illinois is dominated by agriculture. 75% of the state's geographic area is in agriculture, and the vast majority of that is in row crop agriculture, and that's largely corn and soybeans. And you know, we plant every last inch we can. Like the whole model is produce as much as you can. It doesn't matter if we're overproducing, if the prices are collapsing. It's just produce. We plant up to the edge of the stream bed, so we've destroyed all of our wetlands in the state. We destroyed the prairie. It's all been converted to ag, and that has consequences. And the corn soybean model is very chemically intensive, so a lot of fertilizers, a lot of pesticides, herbicides. Um, we just we apply insane amounts of nitrogen to the land, and that stuff seeps into the groundwater. It gets into well water. It runs off. We've got no buffers between the crops, fields, and the streams. We've got no wetlands, which would be natural filters, and so all this stuff is going straight into the rivers. And on top of that, so much of the landscape is tile drained. So there's these pipes running under all of this, millions of acres of fields, and you get a big rain, and it just carries that water um, to the nearest ditch or stream or creek. And then all of that runs down eventually to the Gulf of Mexico, where, as some people probably are aware, there's this massive dead zone. You get all this fertilizer gets dumped in from the entire Mississippi River watershed, much of which is in corn and soybeans or wheat, row crop, commodity row crop. And you get a massive algal bloom, sucks up all the oxygen, and basically there's no oxygen in this 6,000 square mile area of the Gulf, so no aquatic life can exist. And all of that is a function of water pollution in the state. And so on top of the Gulf, right? There's also a lot of that. That nitrogen gets converted into nitrate eventually, and so we know in wells across the state. The monitoring is not great, but there's some done. There's really high levels of nitrate in especially in shallow rural wells. A lot of
What does
people who
that
live
what
in
does
rural
that do
areas
for
know.
human? What does that do for human health?
Yeah, so um, one of the big things you'll hear about with drinking nitrate is blue baby syndrome, and basically you really don't want to give nitrate, water with nitrate in it to infants, because it can just suck the oxygen out of their system, right? Like it depletes the oxygen in their brain. Um, it's also seems to be correlated with various cancers, thyroid problems. So the federal drinking water standard for nitrate is at 10 milligrams per liter. Which some research seems to indicate might be high. Like, right there seems to be that um, there's some indication that there's probably health concerns at around 5 milligrams per liter. So
So it's
at about half of the.
already a generous standard.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's already a generous standard. So even half the federal drinking water standard, there it seems to indicate for cancers and various other ailments. So it's not good. A lot of people living in rural areas drink bottled water, because they know the water's bad. So yeah, so a huge problem with nitrate
Do you
in
know,
Illinois.
like you mentioned, there were high readings around the state. Like you have numbers off the hand that you know, just happen to know about what kind of readings you might see.
Well, I we looked a couple years ago at so there are what's called like non-community. It's hard to get numbers for private wells, right? So the state will test some, but the testing has um, as state agencies have lost funding and resources and staff. The testing is not very good, um, but there are like public non-community water system wells, places like campgrounds, right? And so there's some data out there for that, and we kind of aggregated all that a couple years ago and looked at where the hotspots were, and some along the Illinois River. It tends to be in corn and soy areas, but we would see regularly well over 10. And we're finding some wells where it's 40 milligrams per liter, 90 milligrams per liter. So 9 times the federal drinking water standard. That's really serious. Um, Again, we don't have enough. We don't have the information that we really need. Um, the state doesn't do enough testing. That's something I'm actually working on right now. I feel like that's something that it costs money, but so does everything. But it doesn't. We're not even asking for Well, we are asking for regulation, but this is something that I think is achievable. Going to legislators and say like we don't properly know what's in our water. We've cut all of this monitoring and testing programs. Um, the state developed a water plan a couple years ago, which kind of looks at all things water across the state, all these different issues. And one of the things that the state recommended for itself, was to expand water monitoring, including surface water, groundwater, wells for not only nitrate, but also for emerging contaminants like PFAS and pesticides. And so that's a place where it's like we want to hold the state's feet to the fire. Okay, you recommended this. Let's do it. Well, what does it take? Like, let's just not have this recommendation sit in a document somewhere.
Right. Let's at least assess the problem.
Yeah, let's understand what it is. Yeah.
And you joke sometimes. I've seen you on Twitter because we're talking right now specifically, and like you're in Illinois and talking specifically about Illinois, and your joke is like kind of Illinois. At least we're not quite as bad as Iowa. Iowa has the
Yeah.
additional problem of just way more concentrated animal feeding operations. Like it's just a it's a giant hog farm. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about that's effect on water quality.
Yeah, I mean, these CAFOs or factory farms, whether you got hogs or cows or, whatever like that, you're just generating massive amounts of shit and urine. Like it's just, um, and so that
Like
it's going
cities worth of it.
somewhere.
Like human cities, like maybe
Cities worth.
like the size of Peoria or whatever. In some cases, of just like manure.
Yeah, yeah. I think I shared this. So there's a really Food and Water Watch just put out a really interesting map a couple days ago that it shows where all these are, county by county data. And I looked at the county I live in. I looked at the county next door. Um, I know the county next to us has quite a few. McLean County. It's got the biggest dairy in Illinois. So I was just curious, and yeah, I what it came out to be in McLean County is that if you had a city, actually more than this, but the city roughly the size of Minneapolis worth of so the human equivalent of Minneapolis just plopped down into McLean County, and then that's all over the state.
So it's sort of like if we just decided, like, yeah, Minneapolis can go back to the Middle Ages, and just you don't need to have a sewage treatment. Just like let it flow, like let it rip. It's kind
That's
of the
right.
same thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all basically untreated. There's some, they'll have some like on-site like staging ponds where but we're not talking about like municipal water treatment kind of stuff. So, and then a lot
Which
of this stuff gets
especially with hogs, right? Like with hogs, it's like you kind of think, yeah, hogs are like hog effluent is every bit as gross, if not grosser, as human.
yeah, yeah. It just the sheer scale of it. That's I think it's hard to wrap people's minds around, and so yeah, it's just Iowa is absolutely wild. I mean, Chris Jones has done this work. Chris Jones over in Iowa has done this work for years, and famously wrote a piece where he kind of broke down watershed by watershed, where it's like this watershed in Iowa is the equivalent of having Mexico City. This watershed is the equivalent of having Tokyo. Um, the amount of hog manure in Iowa is just astounding. And, if you're not there, you don't really know what's going on. And I mean, people scoff at the idea of like flyover country, but yeah, like a lot of our policies are made on the coasts and, media's in New York and DC. And I think the mythology of farming and food production is so strong in this country, right? It dates back, goes back hundreds of years. Um, Jeffersonian yeoman farmers, and even though it's a radically different thing now, it's so heavily industrialized. But it's a very powerful mythology, and people just don't. I think most people just have no clue what's happening. The scale of it, because a lot of it is kind of out of sight, out of mind.
A lot of it is out of sight, out of mind. But I mean, no one here, like, you don't go and swim in rivers. Like that's not a thing.
No, I, yeah, I had a friend who moved to town, and she asked like, "Oh, where do you go swimming?" And I was like, "Oh, uh, I don't know. Go up to Chicago and go, Lake Michigan.
Yeah,
I mean, around here,
people do a
I
lot
wouldn't
in
recommend it."
lakes, which is probably still bad. But like that's the thing, you see people doing a lot of stuff in lakes, but not in the
Yeah,
rivers.
yeah, and I mean, just because IEPA says, oh, 80% of streams are too polluted to support, human contact. Like people still go in them. People fish. People eat the fish. It's not necessarily advisable. It's not necessarily good for you, but people do it. I've done it. Right. I've gone swimming in lakes around here. It's not something that I do frequently, and I'm fairly cautious about it. But It's just the reality that we live with.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, but it's a sad state of affairs with regards to water quality, in the Midwest. And like I said, I wanted to take a minute at the beginning here and just paint that picture for people to understand, like that it's very bad. And one thing, talking to people, across the political spectrum, one thing you'll hear is like people say, like, well, everybody agrees, we need clean air and clean water. Like people just say that as an assumption, like, well, yeah, everybody thinks we should have clean air and clean water, but some of these regulations are ridiculous. That's sort of like a crit, but it's like, if everyone agreed that clean water and clean air were important, then why is our water so filthy? Clearly, not everyone agrees with that. Um, and how does this happen? How do we get here? This common sense thing. Everybody agrees you need clean water. Um, that's not the lefty thing. Everybody thinks that, but like, really, because it's pretty dirty.
Yeah, it is. How did we get here? Well, I'm not an ag historian, but you know, um, it
Even
we've
policy wise, even
gone
I
to
mean,
a
even if you just want to talk policy wise, like how why is it like
yeah.
this?
Well, yeah, it's not a right left thing. It's not a Republican Democrat thing. You brought up Iowa, and another thing that I will say, like, yeah, we're not as bad as Iowa, but so always an interesting contrast between Iowa and Illinois. Iowa, all red, Republican, MAGA, all of it, the whole thing. Illinois, we've got a Democratic supermajority. We've got two powerful Democratic senators at the federal level. We've got a powerful Democratic governor, probably going to run for president at some point. So politically, we are at opposite ends of the, at least the American political spectrum. And that does have consequences, right? There are different outcomes in Illinois on different issues. But when you look at agriculture, what is the difference? I can't find much. And so like both parties bear blame for this.
Tom
Um,
Vilsack is the head of
they're
USDA here.
Yeah, right, and
Frequent punching bag of the show here.
yeah, both parties bear blame. The University of Illinois, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but University of Illinois, land grant university, right? Like their mission. So there's a great line in Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac where he says, the mission of the state college is to make the world safe for soybeans. And a lot of the land grant universities bear a significant amount of responsibility for the way the landscape looks, right? Like uh, corn and soybeans, maximize production. Um, don't worry about the externalities. So there are various reasons we got here. University does share some responsibility. Both political parties share some responsibility. The whole get big or get out, right? We've industrialized farming, we've mechanized farming. Um, the Green Revolution with fertilizer, all the chemicals post World War II in Vietnam that had to go somewhere, and okay, um, we used to use it to defoliate Vietnam. Now we'll combine it with some other chemicals and use it as 2,4-D and apply this stuff all over the landscape. And I think a lot of it is about capital, and it's relatively easy to grow one crop, right? One species, one annual species. Um, we've gotten away from farms as diversified with multiple with grains and legumes and vegetables, and you had your livestock and animals, and probably was never a totally closed system, but it was closer to being that, right? Um, that you generated your own fertilizer and you put it right back into the soil, and you weren't experiencing the kind of like soil and nutrient loss that we are now. And I think it's just we can have fewer people on the land, we can mechanize it, we can chemicalify it, and squeeze every last penny out of the land. So you know, I think there are big historic and big global economic forces at work, and so it's a tough question to answer succinctly. Like, how did we get here? But however we did, we've gotten to a place where, you know, when European settlers arrived in Illinois, there were 22 million acres of tallgrass prairie, and now there are 22 million acres of corn and soybeans. This is a massively, radically transformed landscape. I mean, I've seen some people say that, kind of the Midwest into the Great Plains region in general is or has a case for being the most radically transformed landscape on Earth. And we don't even like. I think people have no concept of what was here before, what was even possible. I think a lot of people look out at corn and soybeans and think, hey, that's beautiful. We're feeding the world. That's natural. And we've just we have kind of this cultural amnesia. We have no sense of what came before. Like some of my, I like reading these books like American Serengeti or People of the Ecotone, which kind of get into how biologically productive this landscape was, right? Like it like you're like the Serengeti, right? People I think have no concept that this landscape was as diverse, as productive, as like the Amazon rainforest or the Serengeti, right? And we took and stripped all that out, and we grow 2 annual plants on a majority of the land now.
So when we talk about tall grass prairie, how tall are we talking? What does that mean?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not a prairie expert, so but in the restored prairies that I've seen, uh, which I know are never quite as um, you never quite get restored prairie back to the health and status of a original historic prairie, but they are incredible places. My daughter goes to a nature school on the site of a 120-acre restored prairie, and I go up the drive and I see so much wildlife and like pheasants flying out of the prairie, and there's birds and animals running everywhere, and like there's so much biodiversity just really in these few acres. Um, and it's so dense, right? Sometimes I think about like you couldn't walk through it, right? It is so dense, and I mean it's taller than my head, so it's up. It's tall now. It's like 6-7 feet up.
Then I think people think when they think of like productive ecosystem, whatever, like it just you think of like how much stuff it produces. So you think, I mean, people think of trees and whatnot. I don't think people understand how dense grass is, and how much like a 6 foot, 7 foot, I mean, tall stand of extremely thick prairie grass is just so much biomass, and in weaving in
Yeah,
and out of that is just such an abundance of different forms of life. Like it's an incredibly productive ecosystem. And moving here, I'm from Illinois. I grew up in Southern Illinois. Lived in Colorado for a while. Went to college in Central Illinois, but was in town mostly. Went to Colorado for a while, and then moved back out here. So I lived in the country in Southern Illinois, and then now I'm way out in the country here in Central Illinois. And it's very different. I mean, Southern Illinois and Central Illinois are really different. And the shocking thing to me moving here was like, once June hits, it's like you're not going to keep up. It's unbelievable how stuff grows. And often because if you're gardening or trying to manage plants, it's just weeds. The weeds are like unbelievable. um, they any little exposed anything, and like you got a weed, and it's literally going to be 14 foot tall by July. If you're like, I measure them, like I get 14 to 16 foot weeds sometimes. It's unbelievable. Or you get just like these thick weeds with like, it's crazy how fast and powerful life just wants to take off here. And so doing that, and like myself kind of managing a smaller, moving into a moderate, more mid-scale farm, um, man, when your task is to try to have to control all this growth, it's wild, and it's not surprising to me that you're kind of in a way seeing, you know, it takes either a ton of labor, a ton of work, or like what you're saying is to control this, you just dump chemicals on it. I don't like, but I'm saying like I understand how that's happened. You dump a bunch of chemicals on it. You use giant plows that can you know hit huge swaths at a time, and otherwise trying to control the growth of plants here is an unbelievable task because it just wants to grow things. Although it's not so much if you go out into the middle of a corn and soybean field, it doesn't want to grow things as much. Really, it's slower.
Yeah, it's interesting how that happens, and what does that say about what's going on in those soils? It's so true. I mean, I live in town. We don't have a lot of yard. Have a little vegetable and patch, but like our yard is just massive weeds right now because we just let it go. And I mean, you're right. Like it wants to grow. It is shocking how fast this stuff comes up in the middle of the summer. And you're right. Like in kind of a narrow lens on this, like a lot of what they do makes sense, right? Um, so like it, it is really labor intensive, right, to do farming a different way, and that's one reason we've gone to this system. Um, it makes sense to genetically engineer soybeans so that they'll be fine, and you can apply a dicamba or 2,4-D like over the top and just blast it with a plane, and like that all kind of makes sense with this narrow view of what's
Yeah,
happening. The
it makes
reality is
sense.
that,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, yeah, I mean, like it makes sense. Like that's your goal. Let's maximize corn and soybeans.
Yep.
If all I'm looking at is what's happening with this plant, it does kind of make and we've put farmers into this bind. Like I mean, I'm sure I know there are many who are yeah, I'm feeding the world and I'm proud of what I do. I think there's also a whole crew that are not particularly happy about the way farming has gone. Um, but through policy, uh, through law, kind of boxed them in to this model, right? It's very hard to break out of it, and you're kind of risking your livelihood if you try something different, and it can take because it can like you said, like, okay, why isn't it growing? Why isn't it like growing quickly out in the corn and soybean fields? Well, you know, it's possible the soil is damaged. It's not as productive as it could be, and sometimes it takes years to kind of build that back up. So there's just so many different ways that we've kind of boxed farmers into corners. The advent of um, dicamba resistant soybeans, right? So this came on in 2017. This kind of leads into a whole other area of our work, which is herbicide drift. But you know, when these dicamba resistant soybeans came on the market, right? The thing is, right? So they're genetically engineered so you can spray dicamba, a broadleaf herbicide, and you kill other weeds, kill broadleaf weeds, but you don't kill the soybeans. And you know, farmer A is going to plant those soybeans. Farmer B doesn't want to necessarily, but farmer B lives across the road from farmer A, knows that farmer A is going to plant those soybeans, and thinks, well, it's like, I know, even in low wind conditions, even in 10, 8, 9, 10 mile an hour wind conditions, some of that stuff's going to blow across the road and onto my beans. And now that farmer B's in a bind, maybe farmer B doesn't want to grow them, but it's like, well, I got no choice. I'm not going to take a loss. You know, how many thousands of dollars am I going to be out, even if only part of my crop gets hit? And there have been lawsuits about this in 2017, 2018, 2019, especially. There's just a massive uptick in reporting of crop damage from herbicides, and there were lawsuits, and through the course of some of these lawsuits, it basically came out that, like, Monsanto Bayer, they knew this would be, it was like it was basically part of the business model. Like right, we'll force people into doing it because like otherwise they'll they'll crop their crops will get hit, and so
Do you remember?
just
Do you
another
remember
way to
back when this is a
pursue.
similar? This was when the GMO corn and Roundup was becoming prevalent, and then their sort of way of similar strategy. They would, if they found their seed in a farmer's field who didn't buy their seed, they would sue. They did a couple high profile cases where they'd sue the farm, even though like maybe it was like seed can end up there in a lot of different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't saving the seed or whatever. And I mean, I don't think you can, right? It's sterile. I don't exactly know how that works. But if they were finding their plants in a farmer's field, even if the farmer didn't want them there, then that farm was liable for not buying because, that was the property of Monsanto. So they use all these, different ways to kind of just basically disregard property rights altogether. Um, and either direction it goes, seems like the legal system plays ball with them.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. Patents on genetics is just it's a strange thing in and of itself. I think, and yeah, like a lot, I don't know. It almost feels. I almost hate to like. I feel like I'm falling into some like conspiratorial trap to like bag on Monsanto, but like it's just true. I'm sorry. Um,
Yeah, it's right there in the
and
open.
yeah, yeah, and like it's just it seems like such an obvious boogeyman, and yet there it is.
And it's interesting
But
too, like from like a PR perspective, because that's a really fascinating thing that we can probably spend a long time with, like the PR spin of the industry. Because like, so a lot of this is, it's like if you take a Roundup Ready corn, right, which works in the same way. I don't think it has quite the drift problem. It has its other whole host of problems.
yeah,
But you have corn that's resistant to Roundup, so you put Roundup on it, corn lives, the weeds die. Dicamba and soybeans work the same way, although dicamba spreads out everywhere in a much more problematic in that particular way manner. Um, and that's the genetic, like those are created via genetic modification. And so then um, it's a funny thing then about the GMO conversation, because the GMO conversation always comes back around to like, well, are GMOs inherently bad for human health, right? Which, okay, that's a neat question, but it's not really the important question. The
that is
important
right.
question is why are GMOs only used to increase the scope of corporate agriculture? And that's basically it. And in that context, like fuck GMOs completely. Like it's a terrible technology because of the way it's used. Like theoretically, can you find a case in which it's useful and does something good for humanity? Probably. I'm actually myself not like blanket against GMOs, but they're never used that way. It's only used as a way for big ag to sell more of their seed and their chemicals. That's the only real in the world actual use for GMO organisms.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about how the conversation has been about a thing that's not the actual issue, right? And like it it kind of bleeds into you know conspiratorial kookery, and I don't you know it's like, oh, would you eat the GMO tomato? Is the GMO tomato going to give you cancer? I don't know. I'd probably eat the GMO tomato. I wouldn't worry about it. I don't know. Maybe they GMO'd it so that it would be more perfectly red and round and ship longer distances. There's the golden rice in Southeast Asia where they've GMO'd it to have more vitamin A, and maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe that vitamin A would save people's lives. I don't. That's fine. I'm not. I'm like I don't know enough about it. I haven't studied it. I'm totally neutral on that. What I know is here, it's not that not like oh no, you know the cow ate the soybean that was GMO'd, therefore the GMO is moving up the food chain. It's like, why did you GMO it so you could spray, dicamba hundreds of millions of pounds, right? Just like out of a plane.
Yeah.
That's the conversation.
It's a
and all
sleight of
this other
hand. It's
stuff
a sleight
is
of hand. It's making it,
yeah.
like it's making it not about. And then they, because then they have a whole conversation about, is GMO good or bad for human health? And then they, have their own, like, we talk about the land grant universities being owned by them. They can produce a whole research program about this, right? Give a bunch of people, jobs in laboratories with little beakers and stuff like that, trying to show, hey, look, GMOs are safe. GMOs are safe, and then the public's talking about, well, GMOs are safe, not safe, not safe. But meanwhile, that's like behind the curtain. GMOs are poisoning the shit out of everything because how they're used is toxic. Period.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
not about what it's
And
about.
yeah, it would be if you'd wanted to, if someone had wanted to, it'd be a great, like false flag operation to run. Like, oh, let's just create controversy about whether the GMO tomato is bad
Mm-hmm.
for you. Like, it's just that's not the question. The
Yeah, I'm
question
not.
is what is happening, and that's what our research has shown. We've been monitoring across Illinois for 6, 7, 8 years. About damage from herbicide drift, these herbicides that are being used because we've modified, corn and soybeans to be resistant to them. And, we are seeing damage to trees, plants, specialty crops, organic producers all over the state, from Chicago to the tip of the state. It's all over the place.
Trees especially. It's terrible for trees.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, some of the stuff is just common sense, right? You got a broadleaf plant growth regulator herbicide, you know, its job is to kill plants.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's gonna do. Like,
Yeah.
why should we be surprised? How is this even a question? And in a way, it's pathetic that it's on like a relatively small nonprofit like ours to, find the money, to do the research, to get our volunteers out there on the landscape. So this like sampling, like we do this tissue sampling, like we look for visible evidence of herbicide damage, but there are various stressors to trees, and you can never tell completely just by looking. Is that herbicide, or is that, you know, is that a combination of drought and insect and, fungus, whatever? So we've done visual monitoring, but we've also done tissue sampling, and 90% of the tissue samples that we've collected over 6 years, 90% had residues of herbicides on them. Um, so it's just and oftentimes multiple, right? It's not just one. Like these sometimes these things will have 5, 6 different herbicides on them. And so we know it's everywhere. And yeah, it's just like it's obvious, right? It's obvious. And some trees show damage more than others, right? We've done a lot of monitoring on oaks, and you see it on red buds a lot. But
Mm.
I this is a thing, like I mentioned, cultural amnesia, like not knowing what the landscape looked like. And I think that's true with trees as well, right? Like I try to, like, when I'm talking to people about these issues, or if I'm doing I don't know, talking to Rotary Club or Sierra Club, or if I'm talking to a class at U of I or wherever, I'm out there, I try to tell people, like, just look around, like, look at the trees, look up at the canopy, take a look up close at the leaves, right? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. This was something I was relatively oblivious to a number of years ago. Just because, like, I'm not necessarily walking around looking at the oak canopy. Um, but now I can be down the street. I can be 100 yards away, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk up on that oak, and I can tell there's significant damage on it. And so I see it everywhere now, and
And that's in town.
um, everywhere in town, out in the country. I mean, drive down the highway, and so far as there are any trees left in kind of ag land, but drive down the interstate, and sometimes, like, what are we even doing with these trees? Like, you see the leaves coming out of the epicormic branching, right? Like the leaves are coming right out of the trunk. It's all thinned out. Sometimes half of the side will be dead. And again, there are other stressors, but some of this is just so obvious. You got whatever few trees left along the corn and soybean fields, but we see it in town too. I'm going to keep picking on U of I here, And I will say, okay, let me give the caveat. There are good people at the University of Illinois. There are people even in the ag school who are trying to do things differently. Looking at how to do whatever you want to call it, more regenerative agriculture, diversified agriculture. And so, yay for them, credit to them. We need to get more funding for them. We need to get them, you know, in higher positions of authority. That said, it's kind of a niche effort within the university. So I could walk over to the university. I could walk you over to the university right now, and we could walk down the streets like Research Park, where all the big companies. Guess which ones they're there. They're paying for real estate and they pay for their research. And you could walk down the street, and there's just damage on one tree after another. I went on the U of I quad about a week ago, and famous little spot at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, beautiful quad, right? Like all these old historic buildings, right in the middle of campus, and the trees are wrecked. Now that could be U of I doing lawn care, because that's the other part of this, right? It's not just ag chemicals. That is, that's going to be the majority of the quantity that's being used across the state. But certainly there's a lot of people who are applying on lawns, and I like just looking at the U of I quad, like the grass is, oh, it's perfect, it's weedless. That's not normal, that's not natural. So they're probably applying and they're damaging their trees, and it's just, you know it's a kind of cluelessness. So yeah, it's in town too. In town it can be difficult to um, tell, like, is that ag, is that lawn, is that,
Sure.
who knows. We know though that these ag chemicals are, particularly like dicamba 2,4-D, some of them are extremely volatile, meaning that not only like are the particles drifting in the wind like at the time of application, but like you can apply, the chemicals are sitting there on your crop, and especially if it's hot out, days later, it can basically evaporate, turn into vapor, go up into the atmosphere, and then we're talking about moving miles. And so, last summer we tested 13 sites around Champaign in town, kind of some on the edge of town, but some in town too. And we were looking also at like right near schools and parks, areas where kids would be playing. And we tested on land that we knew for a fact that either the landowner or the property manager was not doing chemical lawn treatment. Right? We knew that. Every single site, all 13, came back with multiple herbicides. Some of those are used in lawn care, but some of them are basically ag specific chemicals. And so, we know some of this is blown in from outside of town.
Wow. And so then that, we're thinking about the health of the plants. Um, but especially if you think of it evaporating, traveling, what does that say for the air that you and I are breathing?
We're breathing it. What does that
It's
mean?
fine because it's just to kill plants. It's like fine for people, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's bad for
What
plant
does
tissue,
that
but here,
mean?
but animal tissue, no worries.
Yeah. 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 So, I'm not a doctor. Um, that's outside the scope of my expertise. But it's a good question. Someone should be looking at it. Gosh, we have all these, research park. I just mentioned research park at University of Illinois. Is the university looking at this? They're definitely looking at how to kill as the weeds. Are they looking at the human health impacts? They should be.
There, I
There are
don't
some
think they
studies out
are.
there. There,
not
yeah,
not not big money.
not no, no. There are some studies. There's studies that look for if it's in humans, and the answer to that is yes, right? Like there was an interesting one within the last year or two where looking around the Midwest at, it was like 70, 90%. I can't remember exact, but it was like basically it was in the urine of pregnant women. Just was there. It's if you want to look in humans, it'll be there. It's like plastics, right? Like PFAS, microplastics. Like we're all just existing with this in our bodies. What does that mean? I don't know. We're gonna find out, I guess. But there was a study that was released just a couple weeks ago. It was done at University of Chicago. Um, I think it was, and this was covered in New York Times, Washington Post. This isn't like fringy internet stuff. This is, serious science, peer reviewed, that looked at bat decline from white nose syndrome. So a couple years ago, bats were declining because there was this like fungus that was killing them off, and the study basically found this was the link. Bats declined because of this white nose syndrome, which led to an increase in insects because you didn't have the bats acting as predators on the insects. So you had a 35%, and then that increase in insects led to a 35% increase in pesticide usage. And that increase in pesticides usage, they linked to an increase in infant mortality. Like they said 1,000 infant deaths. That is mind blowing. Again, not my research, not my study. I'm just pointing you to work that's been done.
But is this, even if you're
I personally,
skeptical, right? Even if you're skeptical, is that so far fetched? Like it seems like it's the kind of thing that's not far fetched because yeah, let's say you tend to view research like that with skeptical eye, whatever. You're just a general skeptic, but we know about the increase of pesticide and herbicide use. Like that's just a fact. We sell more of it. It's out there. That's a known commodity. It can be seen and measured all over the place. We know it finds its way into humans. Is it shocking to believe? Is it somehow like, whoa, no way could it affect our health? No way could it affect fragile infants? Like, no way could it do it. To me, it's common sense that, yeah, that the downstream effects of that are likely to be there. To me, it's like the baseline expectation. You'd almost need to prove to me that it didn't. I would want to see evidence that it didn't. Why isn't the assumption that it does?
yeah, I've been told that's not how science works, but I think there's good reason to um, rely on the precautionary principle of something like this because common sense says that there probably are impacts. You know, at at what at what level, to what degree, I don't know, but right, common sense says like, come on, right? Like these are biocides, right? Like they are meant to kill life.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, we're all connected, right? Like you know, we are all made of the same stuff, so it shouldn't be shocking. Um, I, knowing what I know, um, we do our best to expose our kids to as little of this kind of stuff as possible because we know that like they're exposed. Period. Right. So like
Right.
just walking around existing in America in 2024, you're
You're not
like,
getting to zero.
you know, yeah, like you're, from the time you're in the womb, right? The placenta has like microplastics and PFAS in it. Like that tissue was literally just created. You know, like it's 9 months old, and we're finding it in there. So you know, you're walking around, you're getting it anyway. So we try not to add any additional because, like, I don't know, who knows, right? Like some people smoke for 80 years and they live their whole life and they never get cancer. Some people get lung cancer at,
Yeah.
you know, 35 and die. I don't know why that is, but like, obviously, smoking causes cancer, right? So, um, I kind of view it similarly.
It's
But
sort of
yeah, it's
like a
like it's
Russian
common
roulette
sense.
a little
It's
bit.
common sense, but you don't. No one knows. Yeah, yeah, it is. It's roulette. That's right.
Yeah.
People don't
It's
want to hear that stuff though. It's fucking depressing and like
that it is, but that doesn't make it less true, sadly. And I don't know data on this, and I feel like it's not really very. I'm not I'm not by nature or by like my thinking. I'm not like you mentioned this too. I'm not a conspiratorial person particularly, um, but you can get down the rabbit hole with some of this stuff, and the reason I don't feel that conspiratorial about it is because I feel like it's mostly explainable by, just greed and things hiding in plain sight. So it's not really conspiratorial so much as it is like, yeah, you follow the money, and you follow like the words that people say, and it's pretty self evident. Um, one thing that I uh, would like to know more about, and I think this maybe has that conspiratorial edge. I feel like we don't know this for a reason, but the reason is, again, maybe not that conspiratorial. It's because no one wants to fund it. Period. It's just that simple. No one wants to pay the money to find out. Are there increases in cancer in the Midwest, and are those due to this? Because I intuitively think absolutely. It's just from looking around and seeing that, but like, I don't know. That's not scientific. It's me comparing just my own experience, but it seems as though, um, a, it makes sense to me. B, I you just, in small towns in midwestern areas, you see these rates of cancer. They seem incredible, but maybe it's always been that way, and we just treat it better now. I don't know, but I wish we knew more about that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the numbers and the hard data. There's been a lot made that Iowa's cancer rate is so high. And in fact, I think it's the only state where it's actually increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of people have attributed that to what's going on with agriculture. Um, the university said it was about drinking, but I'm not sure I I'm not
Then
sure I
it's
buy
then
that.
then everybody in Wisconsin is going to have cancer.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, and then I have poked around with some of the statistics, and it's like, again, Chicago kind of distorts the data in Illinois. Um, and if you kind of filter out Chicago, I've looked at like some of the very ag heavy counties, and the cancer rates are just higher than average.
Yeah.
Now, like, something like cancer, right? It's just, how do you tease out
Right.
causality there? And that's one, I think that's one reason it's easy to kind of throw your hands up and say, like, well, it could be so many different factors, right? There's so much correlation. Um, I think it's worth studying. I just think the human health impacts of all this stuff are worth studying, and this goes beyond ag. I mean, I walk down like the cleaning aisle of the grocery store, and my sense is, my like olfactory sense says that everything in here is terrible for me and I should run away as quickly as possible. You know, I, I'm not, um, I'm not opposed to every chemical. I don't think we have to have blanket bans on every synthetic chemicals. I think a lot of these things have their uses. They can be incredibly valuable, but we are just awash in them. We use them for meaningless shit, like, you know, cleaning your sink or, whatever. Like, why? It's just not necessary. Necessary to make someone money, I guess, right? And that's the thing about the conspiracies, that like conspiracy stuff, it always ends up being like, oh, like lizard people under the Denver airport. But like, there's a very obvious one, and that's just, again, follow the money, or stupidity, incompetence, ignorance. Like, that's typically what it comes down to, either like greed, or just nobody really knows what's going on. Incompetence, typically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, incompetence and greed. Um, And there's I just talked to Austin Frerick, who wrote Barons, a couple weeks ago. Um, and he just does such a great job in that book of showing how corruption, which is by and large in plain sight, um, gets you to this point where, again, to kind of go back to the start of the conversation, if you say to somebody, "Hey, I think it's good if we don't dump chemicals everywhere. We don't dump poison everywhere that you live, right? And clean water and clean air are good things, right? So if you make this statement, like, you're going to get approaching 99% agreement. Like, everybody agrees with that. This is not a controversial thing to say at all. Hey, like, clean air to breathe in is healthy. Clean water is good. You shouldn't shit where you eat. You shouldn't dump chemicals that are toxins that are herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, things that kill on everything. Like these are no duh statements. And yet that's what we do. We poison, the air and water at scale, measurably, and we don't, and we do that by dumping chemicals everywhere. Um, and so how? Why? It's in my view, it's definitely there's a big story about just out and out corruption. Um, I mean, that's mostly it. It's mostly corruption in my mind. It's corruption by it's money paying. You buy an endowed chair at universities, and then you get the research that you want. I mean, that's just how it's been for 40 years. Like the land grant universities have betrayed the American people in an extremely deep way, and like a horrifying way. Um, you know, Politicians have suddenly okay, well, this will bring in jobs, blah blah blah, whatever story you want to tell, and suddenly we're doing the insane thing and saying it's normal.
Yeah, I think that's right. Right. I mean, I think it's corrupt. I think it's money. I think the agencies are captured. Um,
The USDA is useless. I mean, we should just end the USDA. It's a useless government branch. Worse than
yeah, yeah.
useless,
I mean,
malevolent.
I, right, and a lot. Some of these, it's like, yeah, we probably would be better off without them. Um,
Shout out to the
it's
NRCS. I
not.
love the NRCS. I'm sorry, I love you.
Yeah, yeah. Again, like it's a mixed bag, and I'm sure there are good people in all of them, but just the level of regulatory capture in this country, um, which is why I find it very difficult to find myself in alignment with the kind of typical left right
Yeah,
federalist states rights. It's like you know all this stuff depends, right? Like I've seen you share the meme like, oh, you know tyranny.gov, you know terrible, awful, I'm frightened. Tyranny.com, hey, that looks appealing, right? And like we got to get out of the mindset that like there's this hard line between government and business, corporations. Like the government does what business wants it to do, you
yeah,
know, not 100% of the time, but more than 50, you know,
yeah.
Chamber of Commerce, big business, whatever. Silicon Valley to Silicon Valley, like government is largely doing the bidding of business. And so
How
I
have I
don't
never
view
heard? How have I never heard Silicon Valley before?
I
How
don't
have
know.
I lived my whole life and never heard that? I don't know. That's
Yeah.
okay. Sorry.
No, it's fine. And they're leaning into that now because they're like, as uh I think there's some question marks with ethanol about what's the future of ethanol. And like I should back up for 1 second. It's like, okay, you asked why are we doing this? I think a lot of people would say, okay, we're feeding the world. And that's the phrase that gets tossed out.
That is the answer. You're right.
And it would be like, okay, let's say that were true. And there's always a cost of doing business. There are always trade-offs. Everything has trade-offs, right? Maybe this would be the trade-off. Like, I'm sorry, but some amount of people are going to get cancer. Some amount of kids are going to die, right? We want clean water, we want clean air, but like we're just going to have to spend more money and try and filter nitrate out, and you're going to have to be on blah blah blah. You're going to have to be on bottled water. Some portion of the Gulf is going to be a dead zone, but we're feeding the world. That's not true. But that is not the trade-off. We are not doing that. People are starving. There's an overabundance of calories for a lot of other people. You know, the price of corn has collapsed, and we're hoarding grain because there's nowhere to sell it. Plus, on top of that, 40 to 45% of the corn that we produce in this country is going into gas tanks as ethanol. It is absurd. So even if you wanted to say like, hey, there's always a trade-off and this is the trade-off, it's not the case, right? And like that's the other piece that like I think we just got to hammer home. And like I don't know, I have I see politicians in our state who should know better, go run to embrace the corn, soybean, ag business lobby. And I think that's a way that they can say like, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but I'm bipartisan.
I'm for the farmers.
Yeah, and it's just like I want to get to the point where you're no more as a supposed Democrat, climate champion, whatever. You're no more embracing corn ethanol than you are embracing a coal mine.
Bingo. This is what I was about to make this exact point. Like bingo. Like because I think it's a part of the popular sort of understanding of things at this point. You think of coal mining, you think of exploitation of a place, and so you've got Appalachia as this sort of like paragon that everybody loves to talk about. It's like coal has just come in and decimated and destroyed it. Well, the Midwest is surface mining. It's the same. It's no different. It's an exploitative relationship with the countryside and the people in it, with the landscape. It's just done in a way that we call farming, which doesn't resemble anything like what farming was 75 years ago. It's surface mining. That's what it is. It's mining the soil and at an incredible cost to air and water quality, and it bears all of the same uh, social characteristics of exploitation. Like it's what it is. It's a mass exploitation of a landscape, and it's very sad. You mentioned too, imagining what those 22 million acres of prairie look like it makes me very sad as a Illinois native. And I lived in Colorado for a while. I've gone, traveled, and am a lover of nature and natural places. um, and the thing, people that live here, it's all Illinois is just kind of, it's boring, it's flat, there's no appreciation of our natural abundance because our natural abundance has been
Mm-hmm.
stolen and transformed,
Mm-hmm.
and completely exploited. But I would love there. I mean, I could just. I mean, it can honestly it can bring a tear to my eye to imagine like seeing this place 300 years ago, and the 400 years ago, and what it must have looked like, what the animals and plants, it's just it's terribly sad, that we've just sort of like collectively made the Midwest into it's a sacrifice zone.
That
That's
is
that's
right.
what it is. It's a sacrifice zone. People, we still live here, some of us, and a lot of the people that live here are, like they're the kind of the tip of the spear making it the sacrifice zone. And I have a lot of friends that are farmers, in row crop, and I don't mean to, and I don't want to demonize those people. Like you mentioned, kind of being in a trap. I think that's very much the case. Uh, I think that there's a way of doing things that, if you want to keep farming, you pretty much have to do. I'm not willing to say you have to do them that way. I think that there are ways out, but you have to be very dedicated to it. You have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to put in a lot of time and effort, and you have to take risk. So by far, the path of like least resistance is to do the things that the banks and the ag chemicals and the ag corporations, the input dealers, all those things are telling you got to do it this way. You got to do it this way. The debt on your bank account says you better do it this way. So it is a hell of a bind. Um, so I don't want to disparage anybody, which include many of my friends and neighbors. So I'm not. It's a systemic problem. It's not really one of a few people making bad choices. Although I also don't completely let people off the hook for their choices either. So there's a line there.
Yeah, yeah. You can't let people off the hook, and absolutely. But this is what I was trying to say earlier. That individual is acting rationally within the
Yeah,
system,
yeah,
and like that's why it's like I'm not going to walk up to a farmer, corn and soybeans, and like, I'm spitting on you because I don't like, it's like, and you're doing what makes sense in
yeah,
a totally nonsensical system.
yeah.
You are acting rationally in an irrational system. And, it's like, yeah, like, what would it be like to see, herds of bison
Mm,
on just some amount of prairie? I'm not even saying, it doesn't have to be 22 million acres, but like, what would that be like? And you're right, we are a sacrifice zone, and that's what I really want. What I think we're trying to do is like hit home with people's like, well, a sacrifice for what? We're not even sacrificing it for anything good, right?
yeah,
Like, okay, yeah, some amount of corn and soybeans, feeds cows and pigs, and you eat those, and okay, right, some amount goes to food, but like an obscene amount is going to gasoline. an obscene amount is going to create food that's terrible for us.
Soda pop.
Yeah. And so like that's 100% right. You know, I I am critical of how much money we fork over to farmers for the current system, but I am not opposed to supporting the public supporting. I think food production at that kind of scale is a public enterprise,
Yeah.
right? I think the public has an investment in it. I think we've invested poorly. I think we've invested in the wrong stuff, but I'm not opposed to investing in farming. And you said like it's risky, right? It's risky to try to break out of that. And like I think it would be great for um, the public, the government at whatever level to help farmers manage that risk. What I see is that we are paying for band-aids on the system. Can we
Yeah.
extend the life of ethanol by putting in more cover crops? Cover crops, which will probably burn down with extra herbicides, by the way. Can we extend the life of corn and soybeans with, increased no-till, increased cover crops, a few feet of buffer here or there? Okay, so Illinois got about $111 million from the federal government, a climate pollution reduction grant. Actually, the state got like 435 million. A lot of that is going to electricity generation. It's all part of, IRA, big federal spending, climate money. But $100 million, that's no joke, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing to sneeze at. I think a lot of thought and time was put into the electricity generation part of that grant that Illinois, right? So it's like transition to whatever, clean energy, coal or solar, away from coal and on solar, wind, whatever. I think very little thought was put into the ag side because I've looked at it and it basically says let's do cover crops and
Yeah.
no-till. There's a climate pollution reduction grant. Now, there's really conflicting research on how much climate benefit from cover crops. But what cover crops do is extend the life of the current system. What
Yeah.
I want to see is like we're going to put $100 million to something. Okay, let's use that as seed money, as starter money to manage the risk of trying something different.
Yeah.
Like right. So like if it's silviculture, if it's agroforestry, just diversity, right? Agrivoltaics, whatever, anything, right? Let's try something. How do you manage risk? You manage risk whether it's financial or on the landscape. Diversify. Be self sufficient. It seems so foolish and short sighted to me that we're going to put all of our chips in on corn and soybeans and selling to China and whatever happens in Brazil. It's just like that is such a foolish economic bet. I think personally that's what I would say. And
Yeah.
it's like that old line that is used for elections. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And like it's just like okay, rural America, rural Illinois, look around. Are you better off now? Who's been calling the shots? It's not a woman's professor at Oberlin, right? I don't know who you're mad at, whatever. But who's calling the shots for in the rural Midwest, right? And are things better off? I would say no, right? The tax base is collapsed, hospitals closed, schools closed, people are leaving. Okay? Like you said, it's like we've basically colonized ourselves with an extractive industry. And that money flows somewhere else, right? You extract and you extract and you take it somewhere else and it doesn't stay there. So, it's like I think it's time we try something different. Here's this big chunk of money. That's what I'm doing right now. Is like I'm going to like politicians that I hope would listen. I don't know whether they will or not, but like it's what I can do, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
just trying, showing up at offices and being like, by the way, there's $100 million. You should exercise. You should use your authority and exercise some oversight on what this $100 million goes to. Is it going to the thing that it's supposed to? Are we going to be better off, or are we just going to be like, oh shit, we spent $100 million and we're in the exact same position?
Exactly. And like you said, yes. Are you better off? And then no. If you're in the Midwest, the answer is no. Um, at scale, maybe individuals may or may not be, but um, and I think as you pointed out at the beginning, it's Iowa's red, Illinois' blue when it comes to ag. there really isn't much of a difference. I have a teeny tiny one because I feel like the Democratic Party is more likely to support things like the work the NRCS does, EQIP program, things like that.
That's true.
Which I think the EQIP program is exactly what you're talking about. Um, it, it's taking out some of the risk and allowing for. I don't think like cover crops are a good example of a very top down here farmer do this, and I don't think that I think that any funding needs to not be quite so top down. It's to find like farmers like, okay, what's your idea? What do you want to do? Let's try
Mm-hmm.
it and see what works. And then, over time, you grow programs that work. If somebody's really succeeding at something, then that program can grow. And I think that's what the EQIP, is helping our farm do something that we have already planned to do in pretty much the way that we already planned to do it. I had to make a couple little modifications to my plans, but it doesn't substantially change what I want to do at all. So it's like here is kind of our plans and what we want to try, and Equip's there to support it and to take some of the risk out of it. And I think that that's exactly what you're talking about and how it should work. It shouldn't be top down directed and top down led. It needs to allow for experimentation because you know what, we've lost our way so badly. We don't know what works, and we're not getting good information from the land grant universities. We're not getting good information, God forbid, from the USDA. There are people out there doing great work that we can start to emulate, but like we've really lost our way and need to find it. So we need to do mass experimentation on the ground, find different ways of doing things, and I think that needs to be supported. And it's not going to be supported simply by charging your customers uh, rates that are three times what the industrial system can charge because they have the support of the public institutions. They have the subsidies. They have these economies of scale that are built on dumping, basically an extractive economy that offloads all of the risk onto other sources, and causes these massive externalities. Like you can't compete dollar for that. Like it's not possible. um, in my view, even, and then I think this is where there's this divide that comes up between, yes, this collusion between government and corporation has created this, right, like this massive sort of like do like the corporations have basically bought the government writes laws for the corporations. It's sort of one thing. And so one person's answer might just be, well, you got to just get the like shrink the government, get the government out altogether, which I don't think is going to work. I think we actually have the responsibility to take the reins of government and make sure they work for us. I just think that that's the only way forward. The government has to work for the people. We can't just sort of like abdicate and say, well, if we just kill the government and shrink it down to nothing, the ship will right itself. It will not. I do not believe that. No part of me believes that the people who hold the capital will run things. And at that point, you have no power. You have no. So we have to. We have the responsibility to make sure that we are governed well, and we have abdicated our responsibility for that too. I think as citizens to a certain degree.
Yeah, I couldn't really agree more with what you said. And we do need to point some thumbs too, right? We have abdicated that, and just like wishing away the government is just living in fantasy land, right? Like I maybe post collapse, right? But I mean that's we live in a reality. We live in this global industrial civilization where there are huge players bestriding the globe. It's going to be government or corporation or capital or whatever. There's no getting around that. Um, I think a system of checks and balances and like right that's kind of maybe the best you can do. I don't know. Like there's nothing perfect. I would certainly love to localize things, but again, we live in a civilization where what happens across state borders impacts me. What happens across national borders impacts me. And so, how do we these are big, not easy questions, and I agree with what you're saying. But yeah, I I wish. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how to find that. I'm not sure how to find that line, but we do have to make the government work for us, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's and things like what's it called? I was talking about it the other day. On the show, I think it's preemption. When you have a larger legislative body um, pass laws to get to restrict the options of a smaller legislative body. And so you see that like the which prop is it? I forget the pork law in California. It's prop
Yeah, right. I don't remember the number, but California says that they won't buy.
right, and the big thing is to try to have a federal law to make it so that California can't regulate that. Which to me, that's anti anti-localist, anti-local control. It's the kind of thing that theoretically you'd have an ally with um, amongst conservatives, but it's the Republicans who are pushing to basically try to repeal that proposition federally. So it's just one of those things where you should be able to find allies, but those allies are basically in bed with the people who have more money.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really. There aren't a whole lot of people I think with principles beyond power, right? And that's. I mean, there's a lot of talk about small government and local control, but you know, just when we like it, and when we don't, we'll make the federal government come in with the big stick. Um,
Everybody likes the idea of local control until it's an issue they
yeah,
they
yeah, and
they'd object to.
it cuts both ways. Now this is
100%.
this is this is coming down a level, but like I think there's a county in Illinois that just put a basically banned new. I can't remember if it's solar or wind, but I think it's solar development, and the state basically has a law that preempts a county from doing that because the state has a goal. Illinois has a goal to move to 100% renewable energy generation by 2045, 2050, something like that. So is that good? Like, right? I mean, the state's doing that because they want to get to green energy, but we are taking control out of the hands of this county. I'm not a fan of that when it's for CAFOs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like because like you see this happen all the time where the locals actually don't want it. The county doesn't want it. No one wants
Yeah.
to live downwind of that CAFO.
Yeah.
But we basically stripped the rights of the county or the local, city council to regulate it. So yeah, I mean, like, right? There's just no real principle but power. And it's like somebody like Trump comes in and there is kind of realignment and he's going against kind of Republican orthodoxy and you're like, oh, maybe there is an opening for um, some shifting of concept about like capital and government and JD Vance is probably more seriously in that wing of it. Trump's kind of a obviously I don't think he cares about anything. I don't think he has a clue about anything. JD Vance has at least made noises
Yeah.
about um, free market capitalism not being the goal in and of itself, right? The goal is for uh, if it's not serving people, if it's not serving communities, then what's the point? Others have to, right? There's a kind of a new right there,
Yeah.
whether it's Tucker Carlson, JD Vance, and like I may disagree with them about what's a good human society, but like they're at least making noises along that, down that way about like restraining the market, not just bending to capital.
Exactly.
But then push comes to shove, and it's like, what's actually different? I don't, like
Yep.
it's noise. It's noise, and it's like look over here.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe any of it's real. I have no, I'd be fine. Like, great. I'd love to work across the aisle with someone who, and occasionally that's happened. Like, we've occasionally partnered with like taxpayers for common sense, who is just like,
Mm.
they're kind of libertarian. Like, we don't want to pay for X, Y, or Z, and we've worked with them like on river management and barge shipping, because like it's another spot where we have just the public pays massive subsidies for just wrecking our rivers, all for the benefit reaped by these private industries,
Yeah.
barge shipping companies. And so like we've worked with them before. I'm like, that's great, but realistically, it's often just show, right? It's not
Hmm.
it's not real.
I have a few friends in that sort of like young conservative policy making set, I guess you could say. Um, yeah, that I met at this event in Wyoming, and they're great guys, and um, talk about just this issue, right? And like needing to think about creating a good society, which doesn't necessarily mean just doing whatever the logic of neoliberal capitalism takes you, and essential to that having a clean environment. And I'm like, great, that's awesome. Wake me up
Yeah,
when I see a Republican challenge big corn, and
yeah,
I'm like, I'm there, I'm with you, I'm behind you. But like until then, keep fighting the good fight. I hope you influence your people. That'd be awesome.
right.
I'll believe it when I see it. Meanwhile, Chuck Grassley is actually the face of the Republican Party on ag. And
Like,
Tom Vilsack of Democrats. So I'm not like, yeah, like I'm not like Democrats are great.
right. Like there's clearly like some inkling, like some of them understand, but I've my mom is very conservative, and she's almost I was born when she was older. I'm the youngest of seven kids, and so she's almost like two generations above me. And she talked about like how great the '50s were, and she's very conservative politically, culturally, and votes one way, and that's fine. Whatever. I'm ideologically different than her, but the thing that I always like thought about is like, you lament the radical transformation of society, basically, as a conservative, like that she laments these dramatic transformations. There is no more destructive, cataclysmic, transformative force than basically the market.
Mm-hmm.
Right or wrong, I'm not even saying. I'm not saying a normative good or bad. I'm just saying you continue to vote for this thing, which, by the nature of of what it is and what it does, constantly destroys and remakes. And there's just that cognitive dissonance there. And I feel like that is kind of part of like what's happening on so-called new right, or at least what they, like, again, kind of make noises about. That's like, oh yeah, actually the market's fairly destructive. And as a conservative, why would I, if I'm trying to conserve something, if I have these traditional values, the market is going to destroy those.
Yeah, and I
But
think there's something to build with there. I mean, I think that's I'm glad that is happening, and I'm glad that that's an awareness because it's the same process. It's like we as people who are kind of if you call yourself an environmentalist, it's like, well, it's the same exact story. It's like the destruction of land, destruction of air and water quality, destruction of biodiversity, destruction of ecology. The market just it's a consumer. It's a consumer and exploiter of things.
it's an extreme,
Period.
it's an extremely powerful tool,
Yeah.
right? And like sometimes that probably, you could, like any tool, you can use it for good and you can use it, for ill. But we've like worship, we it is our golden calf.
Yeah. That's a prairie fire. It's unrestrained. Well, you know, on that note, I'm looking through my notes to see if there's anything I wanted to tie up, but I think we covered a lot. I was really wanting to talk exactly about what we talked about. Just the state of our environmental health in the Midwest and how it got to be that way and what's keeping it that way. A little bit of, and maybe if there was one thing I think I'd like to, I know we talked a little bit about like, hey, it would be good to encourage other people, farmers with, taking the risk to try different practices. We need politicians that aren't corrupt. I think a big part of your work, it sounds like, is, hey, we need a full assessment of the problem. So let's help to understand it better, to research and understand it better. What do you think are other, before we wrap up, just like uh, probably should have spent more time on what do we do?
Yeah, with which part? Yeah, we got a bunch of irons in the fire. A lot of them on like state policy level. Um, the common thread is that the ag lobby is standing in the way of basically all of them. So, some version of corn growers, soybean association, farm bureau. Um, just real quickly, like last year, the U.S. Supreme Court rolled back Clean Water Act protections, federal Clean Water Act protections for wetlands across the country. We're trying to respond with state level legislation, basically doing what, the court said, like, oh, this is an issue for the states. Okay, we're trying to do that. So, trying to pass state level protections for wetlands. And again, we've destroyed 90% of them. And the bill that we are trying to pass explicitly exempts farming. Normal farming and ranching activities are not regulated because that's just the reality that we live in. Even so, the farm interests are standing in the way. So, on one hand, that sucks and it's annoying, and on the other hand, good. Let's just draw the battle lines clearly. I saw this today where, and I'm going off on a tangent for a second, but like I saw this today where the Illinois Corn Growers Association is
Yes.
suing EPA about its EV electrical vehicle mandate. And like, I'm cynical about all this stuff. And like, I was so angry for like the hour after I saw that news. Not even because I think EVs are the be all end all, but because like you have the gall, an industry that exists solely because of federal mandates, have the gall to challenge this mandate, to get more EVs on the road. And again, kind of back to what I said is like, I was like, this just pissed me off. But at the same time, I'm like, good, good. Take a side. Let's draw the battle lines very clearly. I want to be able to go to my legislator, my rep, who's a Democrat, for example, and be like, you got to understand you're cozying up to people who are undermining your agenda. Forget, like, you're not winning points with this. So, anyway, they are in opposition to the wetlands bill, stuff we want to do on climate. We're trying to get actually, okay, so here's one where it's like Iowa's better than Illinois. We're trying to protect the right of citizens in Illinois to use public waters for recreation. Illinois has 120,000 miles of rivers and streams. Our Department of Natural Resources says that 98% of those are not available for public recreation. Basically, if you can't get a barge down the river, DNR says it's not navigable, not public. Iowa, which I usually, say is, even worse than Illinois, Iowa's DNR says that if you can get a personal watercraft on the river, canoe or kayak, it's available for public floating. Okay. And the world hasn't ended in Iowa. They continue to, Iowa's hardly hostile to private property rights or agriculture. So DNR is standing in the way in Illinois. So are the ag interests. I think that's a number of things. I think that they just reflexively, stay away. We don't want you on our property. I think part of it though is that like they literally don't want people to see how bad things are. Going back to how we started, like what's the water quality like? It's very educational to go take a look at what's been done to these creeks, these streams, these rivers. I'll go put the drone up and you can see how they've been channelized and ditched. You can see the algae in them. You can see there's like, you can see the corn right up. Sometimes you can see the runoff going into the creek. I don't think they want people out there seeing what it's like. My position is that like, if we are going to build a constituency to take, to steward, to care for our water, what better way than to, get people out and feeling like, okay, these are ours. I get to enjoy them. I get to use them. I get, and um, we're also working on policy about pesticides and drift, and some of that is about setbacks from spraying at schools. Some of that is um, increasing the penalties for damage done to trees as opposed to an annual crop. I think we could ban the most volatile versions of some of these, and then but still leave. You could still have you could ban the ester version of 2,4-D and still have a different version of 2,4-D. So it's like I'm not even taking it away, just saying like let's just not use the worst ones. So all this stuff has to go through the legislature, and like that requires power, right? Like we have to build power, right? We have to build people power, like, and so that's where we work, right? We're trying to work at the level of law and policy, and we have members around the state, we have supporters, and so we do the thing that advocacy groups do is like show up, talk to your legislator, call them, email them, action alerts. And so, I won't go through the whole list. You can go to our website at prairierivers.org and see what we're working on. I work on water. We also work on energy stuff. But so what can we do? That's that's part of what we do. And then, I think the other part, which is in some ways just as important and really the same side of the coin, because in order to build power, like you got to get people involved and engaged, is the kind of like the, whatever the culture work, right? Consciousness raising, talking about it, education. Um, so, um, the ag thing is so big, right? It's so big that, uh, I think we have to consider this as a long game, right? We're not gonna change things overnight. You look at what the right did on abortion and Roe v. Wade, and like they played a long game. They played a 50-year game, and I'm not saying good or bad, right or wrong. It's just like you want to change things, you have to think decades down the line, and I'm not. Part of me is like, do we have that much time? I don't know. There's not really any choice though, right? So it's like you do everything you can today, but you got to be thinking like, where do we want to be 50 years from now, 100 years from now? We should plan to be around, right? Shouldn't we?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So like we got to play the long game. Uh, you run up against the 2-year election cycle and all of that, but there's a lot of short term thinking in politics, but
Yeah, I think you have to have this compelling vision that I think is there. It's like, hey, we want clean air, we want clean water. Look, build on what people can agree. Don't dump chemicals on everything. One thing I talked about with Austin Frerick and his basically vision for reform is beautiful and terse and like can be summarized with like get animals out of the feedlots and get animals on the land. Um, because when you do that, like just the amount of changes that have to come from that simple action are tremendous, right? So like you build a vision that's pretty simple, that's pretty um, people can see it and understand it and intuit that it's good. Um, and so I think that that's the important part. And then on the other part, like it's just you're right, the ag lobby, it's going to be a dogfight. Like, and it's just I mean over time a strategy for punching them in the face repeatedly until we win.
yeah, that's right. And that's basically what I was going to say is that like I love that, right? Get animals back because the dominoes will fall. And I know a bunch of groups that are kind of working on the hey, we're promoting regenerative agriculture and we're promoting alternative agriculture, and that's great. And we had been in that space for a while, but I think we all internally at Prairie Rivers felt like this is niche and will remain niche until we can punch ag in the face and bloody their nose. And I think I've mentioned coal a couple times, and I think there's a parallel where you can fund whatever your preferred alternative green energy source is, but it doesn't achieve escape velocity in the market until you also make the other side internalize their costs. So that's what I'm thinking about working on. Like I was like, I get it. It's easy and it feels friendly to be like, we're working with the good farmers and we're only talking about the positive. It's like, well, fuck that. Somebody's got to like go head on and be like, these are the externalities. Dirty water from here to the Gulf, dead trees, thousands of dollars of damage to the organic farm down the road, possibly your health, right? Soil loss, a fucking uh, dust storm on I-55, which killed a bunch of people because the land
Yeah.
was overworked. These are the externalities.
Entire
We're gonna,
swaths of the countryside smelling like pig shit.
yeah, and we're gonna make you internalize those costs. Like
Eat
you,
it.
like that's like okay. Let's talk about market. Let's talk about like that's the market failing. I'm trying to make the market work better. Internalize those costs. And so that's where I want us to come at it. And then great, our partners and other people can like lift up the people and I want to work too to like, advocate for funding for like, right, to like support that transition. But like, I view it as our role to take a couple swings at ag. And again, like if we can force them to internalize some of those costs instead of making us, the public, bear them, and not only bear the costs but also give them more money, then I think we'll be in a better position to do what Austin's talking about, and to have people take chances and diversify. And I love what you said about experimentation earlier, right? Like I think that is so true and so important. I view that in our work where it's like, um, I'm not, we're not like out on the land restoring a parcel. Again, we're working at policy and law and culture. And there's no like one way to do that, right? I'm always, when new people come into our staff, we got to try things. We got to experiment because we don't know exactly what's going to work. And I think that's really important. And I think, creating that space and creating um, and creating an environment where people can experiment is really, really important. So I really like what you said about that.
Yeah, because we don't know, right? We gotta figure it out as we go. But we know we need the room to do that, and we need to clear the space to do that. And that means it also means identifying very clearly, like you said, drawing the battle lines and knowing who the enemy is. Which again, and I think this is the part. This is what the industry hides behind, right? Because knowing who the enemy is. The enemy is not the farmers, right? But the enemy is absolutely the farmers' lobby. Not the same thing, but that lobby
Yeah,
is.
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
So the farmers aren't, but the lobby is. And that's yeah. So it's a fight and it's an experiment on the ground, and it's going to take time. But what choice is there? I really want clean water and clean air for my grandkids. So there's really no choice here.
that's right. Yeah, I hear from people all the time who are members of Farm Bureau and agree with what I'm saying, and I'm like, good, that's great. I'm glad you're a member of Farm Bureau. Uh, exert whatever leverage you have. Because like that's right. Like I'm not here to like. There are bad actors, there are bad individuals, but I'm not here to demonize anyone. Especially like I said, people are acting rationally in an irrational system. We've got to change the system.
Yeah. Well, all right. Thank you very much for coming on. This is a great conversation. This is an important conversation. I'm trying to have as many conversations like this as I can, specific around Midwest and the Midwest environmental quality and ag. And so I appreciate your time and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, happy to do it. Appreciate the invite.